They say some messages arrive like weather, sudden, shifting the light in the room before you even understand why. Mine appeared on an ordinary Tuesday, and by the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling, and the past felt closer than my own breath. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I was standing at the kitchen counter, waiting for the kettle to finish its soft complaint, when my phone buzzed across the oak. One new message. Unknown number. For a moment, I thought it was one of those appointment reminders or a neighbor about recycling pickup. Then I saw the name beneath the words, Daniel. I hadn't seen that name in years, but I knew who he was without the last initial, my ex-husband's oldest friend. The quiet one at barbecues who always arrived with a bowl of his mother's potato salad and left before the final slice of pie. We weren't close, not really. We existed in the same conversations like two people sharing a bench at a bus stop, aware of each other, but going separate ways. "I, Claire," the message began. I hope it isn't strange that I reached out. I remember the way the steam curled from the kettle like a question as I read the next line. "I found something I think belongs to you." For a heartbeat, I couldn't place what that could be. A book? A casserole dish? Some small relic of the life I had packed into boxes and hauled away 5 years earlier when Michael and I took our separate exits. I tapped to expand the message. There was a photo of an envelope, corners softened by time, my name written in that familiar, slanted handwriting I had once traced absent-mindedly with my finger on grocery lists. Michael's. Under the photo, Daniel had written, "I discovered this while clearing out a drawer. I didn't open it. If you want it, I can bring it by." I sat down without meaning to. The chair groaned, the same old oak I had salvaged after the divorce, because it was sturdy and honest. A letter from Michael. When? Why? We hadn't spoken in years. The last we shared were practicalities, the way people nod politely when passing in the grocery store, pretending it's not odd to be strangers with a history. I could hear the rain starting its patient tapping on the window, a sound that always makes me feel 12 and 30 and 52 all at once. I typed, erased, typed again. "Thank you, Daniel. I finally sent. I would like to see it." The dots pulsed back almost immediately. "I can stop by this evening, if that's all right." There are moments when the day tilts and you realize you've stepped onto a different road without moving your feet. I spent the afternoon tidying the house like I used to before guests, not to impress, but to prepare myself. A clear table, a warm lamp, the good mugs. I even watered the fern my niece insists is hard to kill. The motions steadied me. They were small promises to myself. You're okay. You can open old doors slowly. By the time the sky was bruised with early evening, I had set out 2 mugs and a plate of lemon cookies I'd picked up from the bakery near the pharmacy. The doorbell rang, a neat, respectful chime, and when I opened the door, there he was, older the way we all are, lines around his eyes that looked like the marks of laughter more than worry. "Hi, Claire," he said softly. In his hand, the envelope. "Thank you for letting me bring this." We sat at the table, steam rising from our cups. He placed the letter between us as though it were a delicate instrument that might start playing if disturbed. Neither of us reached for it yet. Instead, we talked about simple things. The storm last week that bent the sycamore on Maple Street, the new grocery that made the parking lot impossible, how silence can be loud in a house after the radio's turned off. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I don't know what's inside," he said, "but I thought it should be yours to discover." His eyes met mine, steady and kind, like a hand held out to someone stepping off a curb. I touched the paper. It felt like a note from another version of me, the woman who once believed that forever was a straight line instead of a series of careful turns. My name, written in blue ink, waited. I drew a breath that tasted faintly of lemon and tea and rain. And then, with Daniel watching, not intrudingly, but like a witness who understands the weight of witnessing, I slid my finger under the flap and began to lift it, the seam giving way with a sigh as soft as a memory rising to the surface. The paper slipped free with the faintest whisper, and for a moment I simply stared at the folded sheet inside, as though it might vanish if I touched it too quickly. My breath caught, not from fear, but from the strange tenderness of holding something written years ago, something meant for me but delayed by time and circumstance. With careful fingers, I unfolded it. The ink had softened with age, but Michael's handwriting was unmistakable. The curves and slants were like a voice I hadn't heard in years, suddenly echoing in the room. Claire, it began. Just my name, plain and steady. I read slowly, almost afraid of missing the pauses he might have meant me to feel. He spoke of regret, not dramatic confessions, but quiet acknowledgments. He wrote about moments he wished he had handled differently, times when silence had been easier for him than honesty. He mentioned the first house we bought, how the front porch always creaked, but how he'd loved the sound because it meant I was home. And then there was one line that rooted me in my chair. If one day you read this, I want you to know that even when I was clumsy with words, I saw you more clearly than anyone else. My hand trembled, the words blurring until I blinked them back into focus. Daniel said nothing, just sat with his cup cooling between his palms, the quiet kind of presence that steadies a storm. I folded the letter halfway, needing air, needing space. I went to the window, the rain streaking silver lines against the glass. Outside, the street lamp glowed in the mist, a small, stubborn flame in the gray. I turned back to Daniel. Why now? My voice sounded softer than I meant it to. He shook his head slightly. I don't know, he said. It was tucked in an old desk drawer. I almost threw the whole stack away. But then I saw your name. We talked, not about the letter at first, but about memory itself, how objects keep time differently than we do. He told me about his father's watch, how it still ticked though the leather band had long since cracked. I told him about a quilt my grandmother stitched, pieces of dresses and curtains sewn into something warm enough to survive winters. As the hours pressed forward, I realized we were sharing not just stories, but the fragile understanding that life is never tidy. It's layered with what-ifs, stitched with pieces of ourselves we thought we'd lost. At some point, I offered him another cookie, and he laughed, saying he'd never been able to resist lemon. That laugh filled the kitchen in a way that reminded me how long it had been since the air carried such warmth. It wasn't about replacing the past or erasing it. It was about recognizing the way someone's presence can ease the weight of it. When he finally stood to leave, the letter lay folded neatly on the table, resting beside his empty cup. He looked at it once more before meeting my eyes. It seems like it was meant to find you now, he said. I nodded, though my throat tightened around the words I wanted to say. All I managed was, "Thank you for bringing it." After the door closed behind him, I sat again with the letter, my fingertips pressing lightly against the paper. The house was quiet, but inside me 1,000 echoes stirred, memories of who I had been, who I had loved, and who I was still becoming. The tremble in my hands had eased, replaced by something else. The sense that even after endings, life continues to send us messages we didn't know we needed, delivered by people we least expect. I didn't sleep much that night. The letter lay on my nightstand, its presence heavier than any book or lamp beside it. I kept glancing at it in the dark as though it might whisper more if I stayed awake long enough. Memories I thought I had folded away years ago came drifting back. The first spring Michael and I planted tulips in the yard, the sound of his laugh when the dog chased falling leaves, the silence of the night he carried his things out the door without meeting my eyes. Those recollections weren't sharp with pain anymore, but they weren't gentle either. They lived in that tender middle ground where nostalgia and ache coexist. By morning, I made a decision. I needed to know why Daniel had chosen to hold on to the letter rather than toss it away when he found it. He hadn't just stumbled upon it and delivered it like a package. Something had made him pause, made him think of me. So I called him. My voice sounded almost apologetic when he answered. "Daniel, would you like to come by again today? Maybe for lunch?" There was the faintest hesitation, then warmth in his reply. "I'd like that." I spent the next couple of hours preparing a simple meal: roasted chicken, potatoes with rosemary, and a salad bright with citrus. The act of cooking grounded me, reminded me of the way my mother used to say that food was another kind of conversation, one spoken without words. By the time Daniel arrived, the house smelled of herbs and warmth, and I felt steadier, though not entirely at ease. We ate slowly, letting small talk carry us through the first half hour. He complimented the meal, and I admitted with a laugh that I'd borrowed most of it from a recipe book my niece had given me. Finally, as the plate sat mostly empty, I asked the question that had been circling me since last night. "Why didn't you throw it away?" I asked, my fingers tracing the edge of my napkin. He set down his fork, thoughtful. "Because when I saw your name, it reminded me of how much you gave, even when Michael couldn't always see it." I thought, maybe he had, after all, and maybe you deserved to know. His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, an old kindness, maybe even a quiet admiration, that unsettled me in the gentlest way. I looked at him for a long moment. Here was a man who had witnessed so much of my life from the edges, someone who had been a background figure in gatherings, present but never central. Yet now he was the one sitting across from me, reminding me of my worth without needing to embellish or dramatize. It was an unexpected shift, like discovering a familiar song had a verse I had never really listened to before. After lunch, we carried our cups of coffee to the living room. The letter lay on the table between us, untouched since the night before. Daniel glanced at it, then at me. "Have you thought about what you'll do with it?" I nodded slowly. "I'll keep it. Not to dwell on it, but as proof that even if things didn't last, some truths still mattered." I hesitated, then added softly, "And maybe it's a reminder that I'm still here, still capable of being seen." He didn't respond right away, but the silence wasn't heavy. It felt like acknowledgement. Finally, he said, "You've always been worth seeing, Claire. Some of us just didn't say it enough." Those words sank deeper than I expected. I felt something shift inside me, not the reopening of old wounds, but the possibility of a new kind of understanding. Not everything lost has to stay broken. Not every ending means you've stopped deserving gentleness. When Daniel left that afternoon, I walked him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and glistening. He paused before going down the steps. "If you'd like, I could stop by again sometime," he said, almost shyly. "No letters, no surprises, just company." I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in a long time. "I'd like that," I replied. As the door closed behind him, I leaned against it for a moment, the quiet of the house no longer feeling so sharp. The letter remained where it was, folded neatly, a reminder of the past. But Daniel's presence, his kindness, his patience, felt like a new page beginning, one I hadn't realized I was ready to turn. The days that followed moved with a softness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that life suddenly became extraordinary. There were still errands to run, dishes to wash, bills to pay. But beneath the rhythm of ordinary things, I felt a quiet hum, as though the letter had unlocked not only memories, but also a space inside me that had been waiting for light. And into that space stepped Daniel, not hurriedly, not with grand gestures, but with the steady patience of someone who knew the value of time. He began to stop by every few days. Sometimes it was for coffee in the late morning, sometimes a short walk around the block when the air was crisp and the leaves crunched beneath our feet. We talked about little things, the best bakery for fresh bread, a novel he was reading, the old neighborhood traditions we both missed. And occasionally, when the conversation slowed, the letter would hover between us like a silent guest neither of us resented. We didn't have to mention it for it to matter. One evening, as the sky turned gold and violet, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea. The street was quiet, only the sound of distant crickets carrying across the yards. Daniel glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, "Michael always spoke highly of you. Even when things weren't good between you, he admired your strength. He just didn't always know how to tell you." I listened, letting the words settle. There was no bitterness in his voice, no attempt to rewrite history, only an offering of perspective. For a long while I stared at the horizon, the last threads of sunlight unraveling behind the trees. "I used to think I had wasted so much time," I said finally. "But maybe those years were still part of who I am now. Maybe they taught me how to listen more deeply, to appreciate what's real when it appears." He nodded slowly, as though he understood without needing more explanation. That's what I was coming to see. Daniel wasn't there to solve the past for me, or to paint over it. He was simply willing to sit beside me while I made peace with it. The letter remained on my nightstand, folded and steady. I no longer read it every night. I no longer needed to. Instead, it became a kind of reminder that love, in its many forms, leaves traces that don't have to weigh us down. Some are simply markers of who we were and how far we've come. Weeks passed, and our companionship found its own rhythm. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't rushed. It was two people choosing, again and again, to share time. There was comfort in that choice, in knowing that even after loss and endings, life extends a hand if you're willing to take it. One afternoon, as we parted ways after a walk, Daniel paused at the gate. His eyes held mine, kind but steady. "Claire," he said, "I hope you know that the letter wasn't the only reason I reached out. It reminded me of you, yes, but I wanted to see you again, to know you beyond the memories." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made my chest tighten, not with fear, but with a recognition I hadn't expected. I smiled then, a small smile that felt like it came from someplace deeper than habit. "I think I wanted that too," I admitted. That night, as I turned off the lamp and the room fell into quiet, I looked once more at the letter resting on the table. My hands didn't tremble anymore. Instead, I felt steady, anchored not by the past, but by the possibility of what still lay ahead. Life had a way of surprising us, sending messages in envelopes and voices in the rain. And sometimes it sent them through the most unexpected people. The story of Michael and me had ended years ago. But the story of Claire, that was still unfolding. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized it wasn't about finding answers in the past. It was about opening the door when the present gently knocked, offering me something new.